again, had some experience in the industry, working as a building service engineer, even very young age, been put in to be in charge of a, hotels project, looking after the building service side of a hotel building. How many stories is that?
It's
7
7 stories.
stories, so 7 stories. Actually got Professor Tuan now as well. Welcome, Professor Tuan. And so rather than taking a lot of time, and also I know after you finish, you're going to really like a very important role managing a building services company. So you have a very good future, right, of all that. Also, one thing to really, outcomes are measured through papers as well. Getting a paper almost accepted, right? I think almost there in one of the best journals. So I think it's accepted. Of course, look at it. I think we can assume it's accepted. So yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us and with these presentations.
Thanks for the kind introduction, Professor. So thanks for coming in today. I'll just reduce the lighting so it's can you see that? So I'll be presenting a summary of my thesis today. The title of the thesis is Design Optimization for Offsite Manufacture of MEP Systems under Professor Priyan Mendis, Professor Due, and Dr. Masood Sofi. So for those of you who are not familiar with the term MEP, MEP stands for Mechanical, Electrical and Plumbing, often known in the industry as M&E services or Mechanical and Electrical Services. Generally, it consists of about 7 different services that falls into those 2 categories. So the concept of modular originates from the manufacturing industry, where mostly into the automobile and aerospace industries. So the 2 methods that use in the modular construction or modular design is modularization and standardization. It is important to identify the difference between those 2 concepts when applied to construction industries. So modularization is a method that is generally used to group components so that they can fulfill a certain requirement in a large operation, whereas standardization is an identification of identical components that tend to repeat in a product range or a system. So just to get familiar with the terminology, in this study, a module is a combination of equipment and components in MEP industry. So forms of prefabrication of MEP. So the most common form of prefabrication that you can be seen around is the bathroom pods, which are very popular in industry due to the repetition of design. The other forms that related to mechanical services are modular plant rooms and also shops. However, this is only achieved when plant rooms are located outside the building, mainly due to the limitations during transportation internally and installation. So just to show some of the reputed projects around the world, not many projects on complete modularization. It's more of an integration of structural and MEP systems. So one of the most successful projects was the Leadenhall building in London, that the entire north core of the building was built using an integrated structural and mechanical system, which reduced the construction time by almost 50%. Another project that I got the opportunity to be involved in is the modular hotel room construction in London. Again, it was an integration of structural and MEP. So looking at the industry and also the different methods used for modularization in overall modular industry, the main research gap that was identified is an absence of a structured method for identification of optimum modules and quantification of the benefits of implementing prefabrication. So what this research is trying to do is, there's no such method available in any form of construction, not just MEP. So this is the first time we're trying to introduce a method to identify optimum modules in a system. So because of this gap, additional design time is required, and most of the cases it's not being able to achieve the maximum benefits of modularization, and also modularization end up being the same cost or even higher than the construction process, conventional construction process. So this leads us to the main research question. The main research question was, what is the optimum construction strategy to achieve minimum installation cost of MEP central plants using off-site modular construction? considering the on-site constraints. So this is divided into three sub-research questions. Is there an optimum level of modularity? And if so, what is the measure of modularity? How do you measure it? Is there a systematic method based on fundamental principles to identify optimum modules for a given system? And is there a method for quantifying the benefits of optimum modularity compared to traditional and integrated construction? So the main aim of the project was to develop a method to achieve minimum installation costs of MEP systems through identification of optimum modules for offsite construction using minimum human intervention. So it's an automated process. So the objectives of the study were to initially to identify the limitations in the current practice of MEP systems, and also evaluate the modularization techniques, the mathematical methods used in other industries such as aerospace, automobile, and product development. The introduction of a new structured modularization method that addresses these gaps, and the development of an algorithm using mathematical clustering and partitioning methods to identify optimum modules in a system with minimum human intervention and application for case study. Validate the model for predicting on-site installation costs, and compare the installation costs of modular solutions with conventional case study to identify a hybrid approach to design of plant rooms. So the overall methodology is divided into three stages, where in the initial stage, system selection for modularization, where since we have so many different systems in MEP construction, it was important to select a particular system initially for development of the algorithm. And then an ethnographic study was conducted to identify to establish the modularization and standardization goals. So for those of you who are not familiar with the term ethnographic study, it's a combination of different techniques such as discussions, on-site data observations, and also on-site data collections, and interviews conducted prior to establishing certain goals for optimization. So in stage two, different methods used in other industries, since there weren't any available in construction, were evaluated, and which was then used to develop a algorithm for modularization and standardization. The results generated using the algorithm are then validated for constructability, so that whatever the solutions generated by this method is practically constructible on sites. That was the most important thing. In stage three, the algorithm is applied to a real-world case study where a comparison between modular and conventional is conducted, and then a validation of the installation cost estimation model is done through that. So system selection for modularization and standardization, Chillwater Central plants were selected for the modularization study due to the complex assemblies and the complexity of the system. What you see on to your right is the functional structure or the sub-functions within the plant room. So the main function of the plant room is to provide cooling, centralized cooling for the entire building. So three case study projects were used in the ethnographic study. One project we completed, so we had all the data required for the installation side of things, like the cost of installation. Project B, which was under construction, which gave the opportunity to actually visit sites and collect data on different assembly types and handling methods practiced in the industry. And Project C was a project which was under design and construction stage, so which gave the ability to get involved in the design stages and have discussions with the design engineers. So these are some of the images taken during case study visits or during the time spent during the construction period. So what was identified when we looked at the installation costs of three projects? The final installation costs of all three projects was higher than the estimated costs estimated prior to construction. And this was mainly due to the rework, labor productivity, and unexpected delays on site. This shows the requirement for modular construction in the MEP industry. So this led us to the main objective of modularization algorithm, which is minimization of installation costs, which is divided into two areas as assembly costs and handling costs. Also taking into account the spatial adjacency, how close two components are in the plant room, and also the functional groups each component belongs to in a plant room. So then, which takes us to the second stage of the research. So different methods used in other industries were evaluated. One of the most common methods used in the structured method used in automobile and product development industry is design structure matrix, or dependency structure matrix, often referred to as, which was introduced by Pimlet. What this does is it identifies the interactions between different components and maps it either a graph-based or a matrix-based method, and then clusters the interactions that are strongly components that are strongly interacted, leaving weak interactions between modules. Another method, which was used more for standardization aspects of it, looking at the functional aspects of modules, is to map the components with the system functions, sub-functions. So you identify functional groups within a large operation that can be used as standardized modules, which will be used in a range of products. So learning from the other industries, what we identified is when you apply this to MEP modularization, you need to consider both functional aspects and the physical component basis of the plant room, so that the modularization takes into account the on-site constraints and also the operational stages of a particular system. So in this study, building information modeling, fuzzy logic, clustering and partitioning algorithms were used in a combination to develop a algorithm for identification of optimum modules. What you see here is the workflow of the algorithm. Algorithm is divided into 4 stages, where in the initial stage, building information models are used to extract data on each component of the plant room, and to create a central database which will be used in the other stages of the algorithm. Then rule generator stage, where the interaction between 2 components are evaluated to find the strength of an interaction using fuzzy logic. And then clustering and partitioning algorithms are used in the configuration generator stage to identify configurations of different plant rooms. And these configurations are then checked with on-site constraints to see whether it satisfies the installation constraints. The configurations that passes this stage are then evaluated for the installation costs. So what you see here is a Dynamo script. Dynamo is a virtual programming environment which lets the researchers to use building information model to extract data directly and develop the optimization process, and the output of the process will also be represented using the information model. So the pre-process stage, what this stage does is it decomposes the system into individual components and then extracts data of these components and assemblies, such as the component types and then the connection points, the coordinates of a component connection, the weight and the sizes of different components. So what you see is a sample data set. So what we are talking about for a normal plant room is about 130 components normally. So you can see how much data is required to be analyzed in the algorithm. So in order to show the interaction between different components, the objectives of the study was to address the spatial adjacency, functional group, and also the installation or the assembly cost of different components. So we have to come up with a cost penalty matrix or a value that represents the interaction strength, taking all these components into consideration. So spatial adjacency looks into how close 2 components are to each other in a plant room. Functional groups will look into whether 2 components that are interacting belongs to the same function, and also the complexity, rework, and resource requirement is more related to the assembly and handling cost of interactions. So in order to come up with a single value to represent all these objectives, fuzzy logic model was developed to where the inputs of the fuzzy logic model is directly taken from the building information model, and then an output represents a combination of those interactions, strengths that is represented through an interaction. Fuzzy logic is also used in estimation of handling time once the configurations are generated. So I won't go into details on developing the methods used to develop the fuzzy logic model. This is available in the thesis. So these are some of the outputs, the variation in the output depending on the input to the fuzzy logic model. Again, the mathematical background to this is also available in the thesis. So once the interaction cost magnitude is determined for each interaction between components, these interaction values, as you can see from the figure, every interaction was given through the fuzzy logic model, was given a interaction strength, then it is mapped, as you can see to your left, on a matrix-based approach, which is a raw matrix. Using clustering algorithms, then what you see on the right is a clustered matrix identifying the optimum modules for a system. So this shows that the modules, the components that have strong interactions are clustered together, leaving weak interactions between clusters. So requirement of a clustering algorithm. So just to give an example of different type of configurations available. If you take a system with 6 different components, if you want to modularize into 2 modules, there's 5 different ways of doing it. But we're talking about 100 plus components, so there's 1,000 different ways of configurations, which will have every configuration have a different cost of assembly and different cost of handling. So, but only some of those configurations are actually practically buildable on site. So clustering algorithms are used to identify only the configurations that are buildable on site, eliminating thousands of configurations that are normally generated. So we tested K-means algorithm, bond energy algorithm, and hierarchical clustering in this case, where the initial result shows that bond energy and K-means, both methods were able to identify optimum clusters within a sample. However, there were 2 limitations. One is the input value for number of clusters was a user input, so that the objective of the study was to identify this automated process, to identify the optimum number of modules without providing it. The other problem, which the limitation, was the within cluster. Once the clusters are identified, within cluster arrangement was not clear in both these clustering algorithms. So agglomerative hierarchical clustering is used in this study for clustering of components within a plant room. So what this method does is initially it considers each component as a separate cluster, and during each stage of the algorithm it identifies components that are closely linked together, and the algorithm stops once all the components in the study belongs to a single cluster, producing a dendrogram or a tree-like diagram. And the distance measure is, so the strength between 2 components, or the relationship, is measured through using a distance measure, such as Euclidean distance. And there's different linkage criteria related to hierarchical clustering, which needs to be tested prior to application. So generally, for a smaller sample, the cutoff height of a dendrogram can be manually selected or chosen by an engineer, but we are talking about sample sizes which is more than 100 components. Then we need an automated process of determining the optimum clusters. This takes us to the partitioning algorithm. So what partitioning algorithm does is it measures the distance growth between 2 configurations, and a point at which the maximum distance growth occurs, or the point with the maximum acceleration occurs, is identified as the optimum clusters with the component arrangement. So once a configuration is generated using this algorithm, then it uses the BIM database, which was created in the initial stage, to create a coordinate map. So each coordinates of every single component in each module is mapped to identify the height, width, and the length of a module, and also the size of a module. Once this is identified, it is then checked with the on-site constraints to meet whether it meets the on-site constraints. And then the modules that does not meet the on-site constraints are reintroduced to the algorithm for further clustering. So algorithm continues to generate configurations until all the until configuration is generated with all its modules below the minimum handling weight category. And during the cost evaluator stage, installation cost for each configuration is evaluated, and the point at which the minimum installation cost occurs was identified as the optimum number of modules and the configuration for study. So in order to validate the algorithm for constructability and also to evaluate the different optimum linkage methods for the application, a 22-component section of the plant room was selected to represent all type of assemblies and also components in the study. And working very closely with the design engineers of the case study projects, 2 solutions were generated that represents the minimum installation cost and the optimum division point for these 22 components. So what we wanted to achieve is to see which linkage methods were able to identify the solutions provided by the design engineers of the case study project. So I won't go into details of each linkage method. What you see here is the clustering result and also the partitioning results. A single linkage method, which looks at the minimum distance between different components, was tested, and then a complete linkage method was tested, which looks at the furthest neighbor method. Average method looks at the pairwise interaction between average of the pairwise interaction, and ward linkage method, weighted and centroid linkage methods were tested. I will provide a summary of these in the next slide. So summary of the linkage methods showed that the single linkage criteria was the only method which was able to identify both solutions which was provided by the engineers of the case study project. Centroid linkage method was able to identify a solution with 3 modules, however did not produce the second gen solution. The all other linkage methods were unable to identify solutions provided by the design engineers. However, a ward linkage method showed the ability to identify subsystems within a system so that it can be used as a standard module identification method for functional groups. So progression of the algorithm, once a system is introduced, the initial clustering or initial division of modules will be done through ward linkage method, so it identifies standard modules in a system. Once it is identified, the further clustering is done through single linkage, due to the ability of single linkage to identify optimum division points, resulting in minimum installation cost on site. So third stage of the study, where it is applied to a case study project for installation cost comparison and the benefits to assess the benefits of modular compared to conventional. So algorithm was applied to 3 case study projects. However, I will go through the detailed results of only 1 case study project and provide a summary of the other 2. This plant room consists of 131 components. These are some of the images taken during the case study visits of this particular project. So 131 components were then introduced to the algorithm as separate components after decomposition of the system. In the initial iteration using ward linkage method, it was able to identify the optimum module as number of 7, number of modules as 7, which indicates the subsystems within a system. So it clearly identifies the subsystems of the larger operation. So what you see here is the unclustered matrix which was introduced to the algorithm, and after the clustering process is applied, it clearly showed that 131 components is reduced to 7 modules, and 117 on-site assemblies is reduced to 16 assemblies on-site. So the algorithm for this particular case study generated 45 iterations with a number of modules ranging from 7 to 46. And then what you can see here is the variation in assembly costs and handling costs with the varying number of modules. As you can see, assembly time and assembly cost shows a positive correlation to the number of modules, and handling costs on the other hand, shows a negative correlation to the number of modules. So the interesting point to see here is there were different configurations or iterations that produced the same number of modules, but had different installation and different assembly and different handling costs. This shows that regardless of the number of modules, then the point at which the system is divided also plays an important role in evaluating the installation cost of a system. So for this particular study, iteration 6 with 12 modules was identified as the optimum configuration, and the output of the BIM model is also shown here. So these are some of the sample modules which are identified for prefabrication in offsite factories. So in order to validate the algorithm for prediction of installation costs, the only data which was available were through conventional case studies, because this is not being applied yet in modular case studies. So algorithm was first to generate an additional iteration, which is named here as iteration 46, that represents 131 modules, which is the conventional case of plant room construction. And this was then compared to the predicted installation costs for the conventional case using the algorithm to the actual costs obtained from the construction site, which initially showed the installation cost variation of 20%, predicted versus actual. And then this is mainly due to the rework cost in the actual construction process, whereas in the algorithm it is designed to estimate installation costs of a modular design. So modular designs are done off-site, modular construction is done off-site, so it assumes that no weld assemblies are done on-site. So complex assemblies are done off-site, so minimum or no rework is considered in the algorithm. So once you take the rework, when you reduce the rework from the actual installation cost, the variation between predicted and the actual was only 9%, which is a fair estimation considering the inconsistencies occurring in the construction industry. So actual versus the optimum solution shows that the installation cost saving of up to 34% can be achieved through the optimum design, which is the modular design. However, in order to compare the overall costing or the overall benefit of modular, the configuration generated was the optimum configuration, which was generated was sent to a factory, off-site factory, for estimation of installation costs, off-site installation and fabrication costs. And once you take into account the fabrication and transportation and off-site installation costs, the actual saving through modular compared to the conventional case for the Sri Lankan case study was 21%. However, the same case study plant room was applied to a Australian environment, so that taking into account the labor rates in Australia, where it shows the overall installation cost saving in Australia for the same plant room with same constraints of 48%. This shows the geographical effect on the modular construction industry, where the labor costs and the equipment renting costs have a significant effect on the benefits that can be achieved through modularization. So what you see here is the on-site labor reported for the period of time for both conventional and also the estimated value on-site labor requirement for the modular method. It shows that the modular, the optimum solution which was generated only requires on-site labor requirement of only 6 days. So overall cumulative labor figure, labor hours has also reduced significantly. So comparing the conventional case with regards to the project schedule, for this particular project, it shows the project time saving of almost 34 days, considering most of the fabrication is done off-site. So minimum amount of days was spent on installation and also final commissioning on-site. So these are the summary of the application to other case study project, which shows that project B identified 18 modules with an overall saving of 33%, project C 9 modules with an overall saving of 36%. So this clearly shows that from project to project, the number of modules also varies, and also the saving that can be achieved through it also varies from project to project, which shows the significance of such a methodology to identify the optimum modules for a given project. So this brings us to the hybrid approach to construction system. Unlike in structural or architectural, it is important to show that it is a hybrid approach for construction when it comes to MEP, where in some cases equipments are directly sent to construction site, whereas simultaneously there is some off-site fabrication also taking place. So it's not just everything done off-site for MEP industry, it's a combination of both methods. And then the algorithm was clearly able to identify the exact modules that needs to be produced off-site and the components that needs to be sent directly to site. So in conclusion, findings for research question 1. Optimum modularity level for a system exists and it varies from one project to another, even if the system capacity remains the same. System division points and handling capabilities on site have a significant effect on the optimum level of modularity. Optimum modularity for MEP systems should be a measure of both installation costs and the functional independency. Assembly cost of the system increases and handling cost decreases as the number of modules increases. Findings of research question 2, a structured method for identification of optimum modules in a system was introduced to identify the module configuration to achieve minimum installation costs. The developed algorithm is a combination of dependency structure matrix, fuzzy logic, hierarchical clustering, and partitioning algorithms. And the input data is extracted from the BIM models, so it is an automated process for identification of optimum modules. And word linkage, a combination of word linkage and single linkage method was proposed for the identification of modules during the clustering process. And the algorithm clearly identified the configurations that failed to meet the on-site constraints. So findings of research question 3, comparison to case study results show that a cost saving is of approximately 30% can be achieved through prefabrication, and this varies with the number of modules. Achieving the minimum number of modules does not necessarily result in a minimum on-site installation cost, and a assembly cost is low in off-site method, whereas the handling cost is higher due to the requirement of additional handling equipment. And the results generated from the algorithm provided a hybrid solution for plant room construction rather than a completely off-site solution. Clearly identify the complex assemblies to be done off-site. So recommendations for future work. This method can be developed into a BIM software for modularization and standardization so that it can be easily applied in the industry. Application of the algorithm for modularization in other disciplines such as architectural or a combination of these things. Then linking the algorithm with the construction cost handbooks so that the estimation of installation cost is also an automated process. The application of the algorithm using BIM for the complete combination of different systems of the building so that only single BIM model is required to identify optimum modules for the whole building. And also in the cost evaluator stage, include the manufacturing cost of the plant room in the estimation process. This requires a thorough study done on manufacturing processes practiced in off-site factories. This is already being addressed through another research project which is focused mostly on the off-site side of things, whereas this was focused on the installation on-site. So this has created 3 journal papers, 1 to be submitted and 1 accepted and 1 being submitted. 1 article which is published at Build Offsite issue 10, and also 5 conference papers. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank my supervisors, Professor Priyan Mendes, Associate Professor Lu Roy, and Dr. Masood Sofi, my parents and my family for the help, Center for Advanced Manufacturing and Prefabricated Housing, University of Melbourne Scholarship, Engineer Shurumar Fernando and CSEC Civil Engineering Construction,